Hello everyone. Today I'm going to present about another episode of Herald Tribune World Youth Forum from 1954. This episode discussion about nationalism, Part 1. And participated following students: Vivian Salomon from Argentina, Francoise Monier from France, Omar Boury from Morocco, Mogens Poulsen from Denmark. Presenter of the discussion is Mrs. Helen Height-Waller.
Is nationalism a constructive force in world affairs today?
Yes, nationalism is the road of happiness, democracy, and freedom.
Well, I must say no. To me, the word nationalism has always meant one thing: war.
In Europe, nationalism has been so disastrous that we are trying to replace it with federalism.
It has done so much wrong to Argentina that we don't want to isolate ourselves through nationalism anymore.
This is The World We Want, featuring student delegates to the New York Herald Tribune Forum for High Schools, presented for the 12th year by the New York Herald Tribune in cooperation with Pan American World Airways, Trans World Airlines, and Scholastic Magazines. Now here is your moderator, Helen Height-Waller.
Welcome to The World We Want, a television presentation of the New York Herald Tribune Forum for High Schools. It features teenagers from practically everywhere in unrehearsed discussion of some of their common problems. Each of these young people is the winner of a nationwide competition held last fall under the auspices of the Ministries of Education in their own countries. They were brought to the United States at the beginning of the year by Pan American World Airways and Trans World Airlines. They're coming to the close of a 3-month visit in the United States, during which they've been guests in 4 different American families and host communities. But let me introduce you to the participants in this discussion. From Morocco is Omar Boury. From France, Francoise Monier. From Denmark, Mogens Poulsen. And from Argentina, Vivian Salomon. Now, nationalism. You've already indicated a large area of disagreement, but before we start the discussion, I'd sort of like to hear each of you tell me what you think nationalism is, so we'll know what we're really talking about. What do you think nationalism is, Omar?
Nationalism means for me the feeling that is necessary to free people from colonialism.
What do you think, Francois?
I would think it's the belief that you are superior to those with whom you're meant to cooperate.
What do you say, Mogens?
I think that nationalism, that is isolation in small groups, so that you feel more attached to your group than to the whole.
I think it's an extreme fanaticism founded more on emotion than reason and based on insecurity.
Well, now we have got a wide area of disagreement. All right, Omar, go ahead.
I would like to tell to Vivian, if she forgets that her country got his independence with nationalism.
Well, but that was 150 years ago.
So that all the countries who want the independence need nationalism. That you agree this idea?
Well, you need nationalism to gain your independence, but you need a lot of culture and civilization, so that once this freedom is gained, nationalism does not turn into hatred.
But can I ask you, under Peron, there must have been some feeling against Peron, and why didn't you rebel earlier?
Well, you have to have someone who incites this rebellion in you.
Education, I think, or
Well,
nationalism.
Yes, but education, if it's too much forced on you, it causes opposition. Too much indoctrination sometimes arouses opposition.
Vivian, tell us a little bit more about Argentina under Peron, will you? What it was like as a student, as a young person there?
Well, I only saw it through my educational system, and that's where really I felt it. We had a subject in our class. One of our subjects was Peronist doctrine, and in every subject except mathematics, Peronist doctrine was included. So you can imagine that every year having to study so much about Peronism, in the end it tired us a bit, and we were all too glad, all very, very happy to get rid of copies. Half our history books were from 1946 onward, that's to say Peron's period of while he was president. So really, we spent most of our time studying this sort of his sort of ideas and government, and too much of this caused rebellion because you begin to become suspicious of whether what you're learning is really true.
Maybe I can ask Omar if his feeling for independence was of the same kind than Vivian's in Argentina.
What kind? In what
That
form?
opposition came from having ideas enforced on you.
No. The ideas that we have are from the past, from the beginning of the domination. Since we got our independence, since we were under the protectorate, since the protectorate of French and Spanish were proclaimed in our country, we were against since the first time. So we didn't stop this protestation against the domination, and it was since 1912 until the time where we got our independence.
Wait a minute.
Let's
I
clarify just a minute. You say you got your independence, what, 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, and you've
Yes.
been under the French since when?
Since
1911.
1912.
1912.
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was surprised at what you say because I have learned, and it's very curious to see how facts are changes in each country. I had learned that the Sultan of Morocco, who lived in Fez, asked the French to help him in his fight against barbarians in 1911, and you say that in 1912 there was already opposition. I'm surprised that since the time you didn't only in 1940 when
Yes.
you say you had your independence.
I'm sorry. We were forced, if you want, by the foreign powers to be under the colonialism. We were against, because last year France got Algeria and tried to have all the top of Africa, got Tunisia, and tried to have Morocco. But our army was strong, and it was not possible for France to have our country, and it only was France when France was held by foreign powers, Great Britain, Egypt, and Spain, that we were under the colonialism, because we were stronger against France. It was not possible for France to have our country. So when we were
Well, it
by
maybe
force-
is surprising that she kept you so long. Maybe I can ask Mogens now what he feels about independence.
That's a good question. I just wondered why we talk so much about independence. I mean, it's not necessary. Well, what do we need independence for? Isn't it so much
There
more
is-
difficult to create an independent
Yes.
state than it is to achieve the
You
same
see-
rights as your motherland in cooperation?
So you can't forget your past. You see, we lost our prestige in this century. We are a nation, and we were a nation since 12 years, since we have a good past. We had the prestige during 12 centuries, during the Arabs arrived to Morocco in the 7th century. We had predominance in science when Europe was in the Black Night.
This
So
is
we
very
had the
tru-
past. Yes, it's very
Well,
curious.
it is very true that, for example, after the Middle Ages, in Europe, most of our knowledge comes from the Arabs.
So-
But you must also acknowledge that at that time, the Ottoman Empire was decaying, and that the expeditions sent in North Africa were to prevent the pirates from coming to
Look,
Europe.
let's bring it up to date, will you?
Yes.
Because there is so much interesting disagreement between you that I'd like to understand. I'd like to go back to Omar's original point when he says nationalism is good and constructive because it helps a nation to freedom, and everyone wants freedom. And all three of you disagree that nationalism is a good thing. Now, I think it's up to the three of you to defend yourselves and explain why.
Well, Omar, can you tell us first?
No, I've seen the three of you. I think Omar has told us eloquently why he thinks nationalism is good.
Well, I can ask Omar what he means by having nationalism create freedom, democracy, when in his country he has a nearly absolute monarchy with only one assembly of 76 members who are only consultative. And monarchy is hereditary already in his country, and you don't even have a constitution yet. How can you call this democracy?
We got our independence 2 years before. And when the first when we got our independence, the first idea of our king and our government is to make the first steps of democracy, but that needs a good time.
Yes, but don't you see that in the world today it's no more a question of time?
No, but
that now
it's really-
today the
you
world
see,
is in peril.
we are not.
It's
I'm
only the
sorry.
cause of democracy now today that
I
is in
must learn
peril.
to speak with the girls and the ladies. It's very hard.
I think you do.
So I
Maybe
must
we
tell
can-
you one thing, that we are not a nation. We are a new nation, if you want, and almost the population. We have a big illiteracy, 90%. So it's very hard to start the elections at the beginning of the independence. We need a good time. We need, I think, 2 years as we needed, because we got our independence in the middle of the 1956, and we need a good time. We had specialists since the time preparing the elections, so it's not very easy to make
This
elections.
is very true, but I see no improvement in the situation in Morocco.
What's
And I
the
am very
situation?
surprised that you say that you fight for democracy,
Yes.
and that yet you have a few months ago, the son of your king was installed as chief of the army.
Yes.
And I see nothing. I think that independence and nationalism should be the will of the people, and not the dictatorship
There
of a
is no
king or a saint.
dictatorship. There is no dictatorship in our country.
Well, this
You
might
can
be
compare,
a very good
yes.
field for speculation.
You can
Let us ask
compare-
Mogens.
Oh,
Wait, let him,
Wait
give him
a
a chance to
minute.
answer.
Oh, yeah.
We can compare our country as United Kingdom. Our country is a constitutional monarchy, and we have to elect our houses. We have to elect the meeting towns. So I think that's not dictatorship that we have in Morocco. And the king, by his actions, tries to be, if you want, super democrat man, since we got our independence, by many actions. By his, he's always near the people. An example, by
Look,
his
I
son.
think we ought to let Francoise go on now. You've defended your point, I think. Very well. Go ahead, Francoise.
I think it's surprising that you can call constitutional monarchy a monarchy that has an assembly that is only consultative.
I told you that we need
wait
a
a minute.
time. We need
Wait
a
a
time
minute.
for the
And
election.
you know that Perón also said he was very near the people and that he appealed to the masses.
But
But
I'm-
this was emotional appeal, wasn't it?
I am sorry.
Vivian.
Well, Perón certainly did try to appeal to the people, but I'd like to ask you, Omar, whether you think that nationalism is good in a country which is not fighting for its independence.
I think that we need nationalism, because when everybody is a nationalist, if you want, when there is the same opinion, there is some solidarity for to grow, for the evolution of the country, for to have always some the same ideas. I think
But,
that we need.
But
But
Omar,
don't-
Let
mustn't we
Mogens-
consider the fact that that evolution of the country may mean the devolution of the world? Don't you consider the fact that
I am sorry.
it is just, how many years is it? 13 years ago, that Europe was quite a bunch of fights. We had a
Yeah.
madman called Hitler.
Yeah.
You know him. Everybody does. And why? It's not because of his good deeds. He used this thing, nationalism. He used all the red lines, all the bloody red lines on the map to create the biggest mass murder that we have met. But what do you think
I
of
think
that?
he's-
That is nationalism.
No, it's not nationalism.
What is that?
No, it's not the same. I think that's nationalism. As I can give the example of my country, is when the feeling of the people for the king is right, when the people makes his confiance sincerely, not by be afraid. If you want, we have in our country a king, and we have our own newspapers of our parties, and we have a party of opposition, and we have a party who is in the government. So the king is watched. When he makes something wrong, there is the party of opposition who is against the party who is in the government, so who is the king.
But-
Who is
but-
against.
Has he any right to say anything in the assembly?
Yes,
He
yes,
has
yes, there
none.
was-
There's only one. There's only one. A single, what you call it, unicameral assembly. So there cannot be real discussion between the
I'm
people.
sorry,
But this is not
I
nationalism any longer. This is, now we discuss democracy, that is something else. I mean,
Oh,
let
that's
us,
right.
I mean, let us return to nationalism. You can have all these things in a state where you have no red lines on the map. If we had the splendid idea of one world, what would be to hinder for that we had democracy? That is what you are saying, that without nationalism we cannot have democracy.
Well, now, Mogens, what are you going to do with
I'm
the
sorry.
nationalisms? Just a second. What are you going to do with all these nationalisms in Europe? You say all nationalism is bad. It means war.
But what we are going to do, that is what is happening now, isn't it? I mean, look what great things is happening. We have got the beginning to a European Union. Six nations have already joined it. Isn't that marvelous? I mean, just like
Oh, that is
countries as
true.
France and Germany, who have been in such hatred so many years, they join now.
I think this is the most magnificent achievement that we have in Europe, to see two countries like France and Germany, who have fought so bitterly during so many years, who now have a common market and who are more united than ever any country has been before.
But you have
I
the same kind of democracy, and you have the same kind of life. You are free, and there is no, you have no troubles if you want. You have the same happy life, and it's correct. I think that it's right to have the same government if you want.
I don't think
I
it would
agree.
be a political unity. And this is the thing. You have to be economically strong before you have a political independence.
Now, look, you haven't satisfied me yet. There's obviously disagreement among you between whether nationalism is a constructive force or a destructive force in history, and we understand from your backgrounds why there's that difference. But can we move on to another question? How are you going, granted that nationalism is, how are you going to contain it? Now, you say, first of all, United States of Europe. But is it that easy, Mo?
Of course it isn't. That is very true. But I think we have got a UN, haven't we? Isn't that the beginning? I mean, just the educational section. Isn't that a way? I don't know if I wouldn't call it propaganda, but maybe you would call it propaganda. If we just made people more broad-minded, not so narrow-minded and nationalistic as they are, just broaden out the views, then they would find that people are the same everywhere in the world. I mean, so just see us. I mean, we feel as one big
So
family.
if there was in all the countries of the world the same equality, the same law, if all the countries have their independence, have their were governed by the people themselves, I think that's truly wonderful
That's
to have.
the point, Omar.
That should be
And-
wonderful,
Mrs.
and the
Waller,
world
can I
should be
ask-
one, without
Let me-
frontiers.
Can I ask
Let me ask Mogens one point on this first. Do you think that we should start right now destroying nationalism with federation, or will you meet Omar's point and say he'd be glad to do that once all nations have got their freedom? And what does Francoise think about this?
Well, I didn't think of this really, but I think that there is something very good in Mogens' position. For example, I would like to ask Mogens what he feels towards Trivo, the
Wait a
Yugoslav
minute, Francoise,
delegate.
you're evading the point. What about
I would
Omar's
like,
point?
Yes, I would like to ask you one thing, Miss France, Francoise, I'm sorry. I would like to ask you one question. What do you feel as a French citizen? What do you feel about Algeria now? You have the same situation. Did you like the German in your country?
Well, I think it's different because Algeria was not a united and free country before the French came.
I am
As
sorry.
France was a free country, a democracy, before the Germans invaded us with troops
You see,
with Hitler, and this was super imperialist from the part of Hitler. But when the French came in Algeria, they were tribes disseminated in the very poor country.
I think-
And since they have developed the country so much that the population has grown about 5 times more, that they have built roads and railroads.
Can I tell you one
Wait a
thing?
minute,
How
give
you see-
Vivian a chance, and then you can
You
answer.
see, Mrs.
Wait a minute,
Waller.
Omar, give Vivian a chance, and then you can answer. Go
I
ahead.
think that now we're touching on subjects which even our representatives in the United Nations find difficult to solve. Maybe we should go back to the subject of nationalism.
There was one point that when we are under the colonialism, the prestige is lost, really. Because our past now is the same as Algeria is lost. That we were a nation, if you want, savage nation. There was no unity, but we were a nation, and we lived in peace during 12 centuries, and we had relations with all the countries of the world. Our diplomacy was very strong. Our army was very strong. I can tell you now that we were one of the first countries of the world to recognize the independence of the United States.
But now let's move on from the past.
Yes, the Algerian is the same. The Algerian is the same problem. They were a nation important with their universities. So yes, but we lose our prestige when we are under the colonialism.
Omar, why do you talk about prestige all the time? Isn't it much better to live in peaceful cooperation with many other people than to talk about the national prestige? It doesn't really matter so long as peace.
I am sorry, I answer the question of Francoise that Algeria was always in fight between the tribes, and when France was in Algeria, they made evolution. What kind of evolution? It was evolution for the profit of the settlers, European settlers.
And what
because now
about-
in Algeria, I am sorry.
And what about your education? And what about roads, railroads, industry,
we have
90%,
hospitals? 90% of the inhabitants are in illiteracy.
That is
28 daughters we got when we got our independence. We had.
And
In the government, we put all the intellectual that we had. You see, that's if you want, that's good for that's good of the Europeans who live in our country and who live in Algeria.
there's one
Now-
point that you forget, is that France has always respected the customs of the countries in which she was. And that is what she respected, the Muslim customs in your country.
I am sorry,
But
but
she built free schools for all the children, and there was no segregation, no separated schools for Europeans or Muslims.
can you
And
answer
this
me
is-
why we have now 90% of the inhabitants are in illiteracy? Why we have 1,500,000 of boys who are not in the schools now? Why in Algeria they have now 2,500,000 who are in the schools?
Well, I can
Why
ask you
they
why...
have only in Algeria they have only 4 doctors for 100,000 persons.
Well, I
Why?
can ask you why they didn't go to school if
But
the
there
education
are no
was
schools.
free.
There are no schools.
There were schools there.
But they-
What about the
That's
great
not enough.
university in
Well,
Dakar?
now this is fascinating. Now we're on a
These are
question
local
of fact,
affairs.
and we don't know, but this is a question of fact in which two people, one a North African and one a French girl, have entirely different facts. And we can't settle this one until we really find out what the facts are. It's always so difficult when two people have different sets of facts.
No, you
Usually, each person is a little bit right. This is one of the difficult areas. But Omar, I want to move on now because we've got to try to get some of your reasoning, particularly yours, Mogens. I want to know whether you honestly say today that you think nationalism is destructive, and before, coming back to Omar's point, before all nations in the world have their independence, we should really begin to do away with nationalism. Can you support that position?
I can support it fully because I don't see the great things as independence. What is independence really? Nobody is independent if we are going to take it from that point of view.
Is to live in democracy
No,
governed by the
just a minute. Thanks. I must say I can only see that nationalism that must lead against a third world war, and which we don't want. I think that it's absolutely
Why you don't
necessary
resolve the
that must do
problems
that.
by peace, as English now, as United Kingdom now is resolving the problem by peace?
But for
In
example-
Nigeria,
But for
I'm sorry, in Gold Coast, and the next year,
Well,
I think in June, by in the
can you
Irish
let
coast.
Vivian say something, please?
Yes, but don't you think that the nationalistic feeling divides the world? After all, if you feel that you as a Moroccan, if Morocco, it gives you feeling that Morocco is a country which is you feel a Moroccan. We are all inhabitants of the same world. We
Yeah.
should kind of not feel so much for ourselves.
I agree
and
very
more
well your idea,
consider the
but-
others
Minute.
too. After all, we're not the only ones.
And maybe there should be a kind of world government, and in the UN, the delegates, instead of receiving orders from their governments, and they always disagree, they should be elected in their countries and give orders themselves to the government after having discussed, and then there should be no problem of Algeria or any other kind of problem.
If there was
Because-
democracy in all the countries, but not in all the countries, you have in European countries, you have in the West, especially in the West country, where there was now democracy, and almost all the important part of the world now is living not in democracy. They are fighting for
well,
this democracy to be world one.
But Omar, don't you realize that exactly a world government, that's the best way of gaining democracy? We are all interested in
I would like
democracy.
very well for the peace. I would like.
Everybody wants to
If there
have
is equality, if it's for the equality and for democracy for all the world, in all the countries of the world, I like very well.
But
I
that is
agree
what
your
we're going
idea.
to make through
That's
a world
very well.
government.
I agree your idea.
Look, where is the country where we feel there is the less democracy? This is Russia. And you have to understand historically that Russia has not done all the thinking that Europe did since the 16th century. There was no Renaissance, there was no Reformation. Their religion is still a mass mysticism. And so you must understand that you cannot oblige these people to do all this thinking in a few years that we Europeans did in 4 centuries. I think this can come by world government, by many, cooperation, and I think cultural relations, having cultural relations very free between all the countries would be so much better.
That
Now
should be
we're
very
shifting
well.
from nationalism to coexistence, are we? Let me put a point there then on a question of principle. Mogens, you agree, and you and Francoise agree that, or do you agree that it was good to fight Hitler?
Well, I think that Hitler had a kind of super-nationalism that did harm to the other countries, and he did not accept coexistence.
But for me, it is a very hard question. I thought about it a long time. My country was occupied by Hitler. I have tried to find out whether I myself would have gone in for the idea. If I really would have fought as a participant of that war, if it had been actual. And I must say, I don't think I could do it. I mean, I would feel it so bad to take any person's life. I can just take the exam. I can think of Gerd. He's from Germany in our group. And I just think it was such persons which were Germans. It were not barbarians and raw people. It were really persons as all.
Yes.
And therefore it's so hard to think that any person really should be interested in being cruel. The same with the Russians. I know Triva. He's a communist, and I like him very much. And then I cannot see the point anymore of preaching against communism. And,
yes. That is why I think that our forum is such a good experience, because we feel that, for example, a communist delegate is exactly the same as a Moroccan or a French. We feel exactly the same, don't we, Omar? So I don't think there should be such prejudices developed by nationalists. I think it's completely ridiculous.
I wonder if the problem of coexistence is made more or less difficult by the fact that you can be friends with people whose ideas you totally disagree with.
I think you can perfectly be friends with somebody, because you always find some field in which you can find some relation and some understanding. And people are people all over the world. And when you reason correctly, you can find that all your goals are the same. Everybody wants to raise the standard of living in the whole world. Everybody wants freedom of thinking and of action. Everybody wants free education. And I think these are common goals.
I think that we must sometimes remember that the human is weak, that he makes mistakes, but that we can't forget the past. And if there is equality, democracy, and the same life in all the countries of the world should be one.
Well, that's a constructive note to end on. I'm sorry our time's already up and we haven't even begun to open the subject. Maybe in summary one could say that nationalism, would you agree, is like fire? It's a force you need to live with, but it can sometimes get out of control.
Something
Next week we'll continue on the question of nationalism.